It's my honor to introduce my next guest, Nicholas Kristof. He's an op-ed columnist at the New York Times and author with his wife, former Times editor Sheryl WuDunn, of Half the Sky, From Oppression to Opportunity for Women Worldwide. Tell you a little about Mr. Kristof. He grew up on a sheep and cherry farm near Yamhill, Oregon, and then graduated Phi Beta Kappa from Harvard, studied law at Oxford on a Rhodes Scholarship, graduating with first-class honors. He joined the New York Times in 1984. In 1990, Mr. Kristof and his wife, then at that point also a Times journalist, won a Pulitzer Prize for their coverage of China's Tiananmen Square democracy movement. They were the first married couple to win a Pulitzer in journalism. Mr. Kristof won a second Pulitzer in 2006 for his commentary in his op-eds in the New York Times for what the judges called, quote, his graphic, deeply reported columns that at personal risk focused attention on genocide in Darfur and gave voice to the voiceless in other parts of the world. In his column, Mr. Kristof was an early opponent of the Iraq War, among the first to warn we were losing ground to the Taliban in southern Afghanistan, among the first to raise doubts about WMD in Iraq, the first to report that President Bush's State of the Union claim about Iraq seeking uranium from Africa was contradicted by the administration's own investigations. And I've really noticed over the last few years his columns have often focused on global health, poverty, gender issues in the developing world. Since 2004, he's written dozens of columns about Darfur. Prior to their newest, Half the Sky, Mr. Kristof and Ms. WuDunn are the authors also of China Wakes, The Struggle for the Soul of a Rising Power, and Thunder from the East, Portrait of a Rising Asia. You can learn more at Kristof's blog. That's at nytimes.com/ontheground. nytimes.com/ontheground, and at a site that he and his wife have put up around the issues in the book Half the Sky, and that site is called Half the Sky Movement. One word, halftheskymovement.org. Welcome, Nicholas Kristof.
Oh, my pleasure.
I like listeners to get a bit of a feel for the people behind the work and the ideas. So, I want to hear briefly about your path. How does one become an op-ed columnist, and then how is it that your focus turned so to those issues that I mentioned, global health, poverty, gender, and so on?
Well, my path to a column was I was, in a sense, a beneficiary of 9/11. I'd always wanted a column, but my expertise was really in international affairs. My background had been as a foreign correspondent, and I figured I would never really have the chance because my colleague Tom Friedman already had a foreign affairs column. And then 9/11 happened, and all of a sudden there was much greater interest and appetite for international commentary. And so I jumped onto the page shortly after 9/11. And in terms of the things I focus on, when I first got the column, I thought, wow, I'll be molding opinions, twice a week over breakfast. And it really doesn't work that way. It really became clear that when I write about a subject that people have already thought about, then people who start out agreeing with me think I'm brilliant. And people who start out disagreeing with me think I've completely missed the point. And on those topics that are already on the agenda, you actually change people's minds much less than I think, we would like to believe or a lot of people think. But where we really do have a certain amount of power is with the spotlight we carry. And when we shine that on an issue that people are not focusing on and then maybe get them to pay attention to it, that really is a significant power. And so increasingly I've tried to shine it on issues like Darfur, like sex trafficking, like global poverty, global health, because it does seem to me that is one way of making a difference.
Mm-hmm. And it does seem very much that your work is about making a difference. One thing that I was thinking about as I read about your career and obviously the movement in the direction that I said is when one starts out as a reporter, you're supposed to be neutral. You're supposed to stay aside from it. Once one is doing columns, then they can become more of an advocate. Once they starting organizations, they're a full-blown advocate. How has that evolution happened in you?
It's a very difficult balance, and especially with issues like genocide, it's pretty hard to maintain a lot of journalistic objectivity when you're running around Darfur talking to survivors of massacres. In a sense, for my wife and I, for Sheryl and me, the key moment that really, I think, shaped us in this respect was after we covered Tiananmen in China. It was, just a huge milestone for us, and I was on Tiananmen Square that night when the troops opened fire. And we had been helped in covering Tiananmen by a young man at Tsinghua University, partly because he had helped us, because he had helped the New York Times. He got into trouble. He ended up in prison. He escaped from prison and came to Beijing and asked for our help in fleeing China. You know, the one thing that was pretty clear was that as a New York Times Beijing bureau chief was that I should not be helping an escaped felon flee the country. But here was a 19-year-old kid who helped us.
Yeah.
And, you know, if we didn't help him, he was cooked. And Sheryl and I just agonized over that. We did eventually help him. He was able to flee the country, and he came to the U.S. But that, for us, that kind of broke the ice, and there was a real tension between our professional responsibility as we saw it and our human responsibility as we saw it. And that tension has arisen periodically in places like Darfur, in the brothels of Cambodia, in eastern Congo, and elsewhere.
The issues, I'll do some quick statistics so you don't have to. 1 million children forced into prostitution every year, 3 million women sold as sex slaves per year, more women likely to be maimed or killed by male violence than by cancer, malaria, traffic accidents, and war combined. The issues are often really dire, yet you and your wife both have a tone of hope or optimism. How do you do it, and how can you offer that to listeners?
One of the things that when we were writing Half the Sky, in a sense, and I mean it sounds a bit absurd to say it, but we really wanted to write a hopeful, if you will, book about sex trafficking, about maternal mortality, about sexual violence, because I think that when people hear only the horror stories, then they tend to tune out, and they think this is hopeless. It's sad, it's tragic, but it's hopeless. And in fact, it isn't. And over the time I've been reporting on these issues, I've seen real progress, and I've seen what difference individuals and organizations can do. Cambodia is far better off today in terms of girls being kidnapped and locked up in brothels than it was when I first went there as a reporter. And frankly, you know, just as a reporter, when I cover sex trafficking, I come back outraged at those brothel owners, but more than that, the dominant emotion is just a feeling of utter admiration for the incredible people working out there on the front lines in those red light districts, risking their lives to help others there. And so I come back from places like that truly with my confidence in humanity reassured rather than diminished.
Mm-hmm. Let me just mention, by the way, I interviewed Ben Skinner recently on his book, A Crime So Monstrous, which is on all of slavery, not just sex trafficking and so on. But the thing that was most...
He's a terrific guy and a terrific book and really a pioneer in this subject.
Yes, because he goes face to face and writes about the real face. What I was going to say that was most remarkable to me is that I've interviewed many big names on many big subjects over about a dozen years. That article, when I turned it into a print article, is the most widely spread, most powerful thing I've ever put out. And so this issue does touch people.
It's slavery. It really is. And that was one of the epiphanies that led Sheryl and me to write Half the Sky. I was in a Cambodian brothel interviewing a 15-year-old girl who'd been kidnapped by a neighbor and was locked up in that brothel. And the only way she was going to get out was, when she became infected with AIDS and was no longer able to earn money for her owner. Later, indeed, I ended up buying 2 individuals in Cambodia. I got receipts from the brothel owners. When you can gain legal title, when you get a receipt for buying a human being, that should be a shame on international conscience.
Let me say one thing. Benjamin questions the act of buying slaves. He says that. So of course you know this controversy. I want to ask your opinion, but I'm going to give his side first. He says that if we bought every slave in Haiti, for instance, the next year there'd be twice as many because business would be so good.
Oh, he's absolutely right. After I bought those 2, then I kept getting emails from people saying, buy one for me. And it doesn't work. It's not a generalized solution to the problem. In my case, it was really 2 things were going on. One was that in the past I had found the individuals that I was going to write about and had milked them for information, gotten their stories, and then had walked out of the brothel knowing that I had a great story and that they were going to stay behind and die of AIDS. And it seemed unfair and exploitative of them, and I didn't want the same thing to happen. But also, I knew that if I did buy them and worked with a aid organization to set them up again in their hometowns with small businesses, that I could follow that story, shine a light on it, and help get this issue on the agenda in a way that would make it resonant with readers and, hopefully help make a step at ending it. And I think, indeed, that did happen, and one of the traffickers there went to jail as a result of those columns.
So, in other words, what you're saying is in this one-to-one situation where you are dealing with one person and you can make the most of that change in their lives, there's more to be gained than there would be just someone buying someone to think they're making a difference.
Yes, but it's not a generalized solution, and I wouldn't recommend that people do it. I mean, it's good to help women escape, because if a brothel owner has paid $500 for a girl and then he loses that investment, I mean that undermines his business model.
Right.
But paying for that girl is not a way of ending.
Right. Escape is a business loss. Purchase is a business gain.
Exactly.
Yeah. Let me broaden the subject for a second here, because I just want to put it in context with the rest of this program. So we're going to talk more about just global poverty. With my first guest, Philippe Diaz, the writer-director of the documentary The End of Poverty, we laid out the scale and the intransigence of grinding global poverty and in fact, its growth in the current economic crisis. He and the film take the position that 1 million malaria nets is not going to change a system that goes back 5 centuries and, in their analysis, seems to still serve the short-sighted needs of the North. You and your wife seem equally drawn to confronting the truth and to healing it. Do you see a successful role for incremental change?
Absolutely. And I think that one of the mistakes that we've made in the past is to pursue only solutions to the entire problem. And I think that A, tends to discourage people because it's pretty hard. And B, the kinds of solutions that arise, they have a somewhat mixed record, that they tend to involve, international conferences and a lot of smart people getting together and issuing these top-down solutions, and they don't have a great record. And in contrast, if you get a particular person who goes out and builds a school Greg Morden said what he's doing with 3 cups of tea. Now, that is not going to solve the problem of illiteracy in Pakistan. But when you go out to that village and you talk to people there, it has made a real substantial impact on real people's lives, and that those lives in turn will echo in other people's lives. So I think that I really am a believer in incremental steps and doing what we can to help individuals, with local people taking local control, local buy-in for their efforts. And that's not to say I'm not in favor of the real international efforts as well, but I think it's a real mistake to diminish the good work done by these individuals.
Yeah, let me just say that he, by the way, thinks that Jeffrey Sachs' Millennium Goals are actually less helpful probably than the incremental change, because they don't really change the system, they just rejigger it, but that's just his point of view. Let me ask you, we haven't quite set up, because we moved very quickly, into this issue of the downside, of course, is the oppression of women. The upside is the enormous dynamic power of the empowerment of women. I'm going to set it up with this question. It seems to me that we've known for years that educating and empowering women is the single greatest thing we can do to reduce poverty and improve quality of life. I'm curious when we learned that, and then anything else you want to say about why we know it's so.
There began to be better research in the late 80s that began to really point to this question, that you get higher returns from educating girls, for example, than educating boys. In particular, we began to get more microeconomic research on spending patterns that is frankly just sort of embarrassing if you're a man.
Yes, I know.
That when men control the purse strings, then an extraordinary amount of money ends up going toward alcohol, tobacco, prostitution, this kind of thing. In Half the Sky, we crunch the numbers for families earning less than $1 a person per day, which is one of the standard global metrics of poverty. In that population, in that cohort, about 2% of incomes are invested in education. which is a great investment. In contrast, 20% is spent on alcohol, tobacco, prostitution, sugary drinks, and extravagant festivals.
So a simple 10 times as much.
10 times as many. And it's basically because men are allocating that spending power. And if you give women more earning power by educating them, by using microfinance, microsavings, by giving them more legal property rights, then women have more control over those purse strings, and you begin to see much more money going toward their children and towards starting small businesses. And it's kind of the dirty little secret of poverty, but it's a powerful reason to focus development efforts on women, indeed.
And how much does the oppression of women that's stuck into certain societies, the Muslim society and other, it seems that very often not only were the men spending it whatever they wanted to, but they were enforcing this oppression of women so that they could spend it whatever way they wanted to. How much are we dealing with culture here?
Well, first of all, I think we should be wary of suggesting that, that basically the problem is men. I mean, the problem is indeed culture, but it's often women who enforce that culture. Most of the brothel owners and most of the traffickers are women, actually, not men. If you ask people their views about wife-beating, then the best predictor of whether they are in favor or against wife-beating is not whether they're male or female. It's rather their level of education and is whether they live in a city or a rural area. So, indeed, the problem is often a misogynistic or patriarchal culture, but it's a culture that can be absorbed and transmitted by women almost as much as by men.
Very, very powerful. So in other words, they may hold those same tenets of culture that we think are oppressing them, or that are oppressing them. Finally, let me just say, Nicholas Kristof, we've got about 2 minutes. What should listeners do besides pick up the book Half the Sky and go to halftheskymovement.org? Well,
I think that people do tend to psych themselves out, and they worry about corruption. They worry about big aid bureaucracies. They think an individual can't really make a difference. And I think that we've gotten a lot better at figuring out how to do that. And so don't think that you're going to end all of sex trafficking worldwide or that you're going to end poverty, but think about what you can do to actually make a difference in, a real life out there. And so in Half the Sky, we list, various steps you can take in the next 10 minutes, such as a child sponsorship through, like our family sponsors through Plan USA, or Women for Women International has sponsorship. There are many, many of these sponsorship programs. If you go to kiva.org or globalgiving.org, then you see a way you can also dip your toe in the field. But beyond that, I think we'd really love to see people get more engaged, and don't just be a check writer, but go and visit a project, sponsor something, and really invest some of yourself in it. And indeed, on halftheskymovement.org, we list some great organizations in this space that just can hugely use not only donors but help. And so we'd love to see more people get engaged in those causes.
Okay, so what you're really saying is that the big step that people can take is when they actually get engaged and travel and do something on the ground.
Especially for young people. I think it's so important. This is not something that we learn about intellectually. It's something we engage in emotionally. And once you see these sites, once you encounter poverty, see it, smell it, feel it, then it engages you as you're never going to forget it, and you will want to make a difference.
And as you're saying, if you do that as a young person in that time when you're figuring out who you are and what the world is, that will stay with you, and you then can become a force for good for the rest of your life.
Yes, and it's not only, it's not that you become a saint. I think one of the things that struck us in writing Half the Sky was how much the volunteers, how much the Americans benefited from getting engaged. It is an awful lot more fulfilling to help people who are somewhat disadvantaged than it is to make zillions on Wall Street.
Exactly. I've been speaking with Nicholas Kristof, op-ed columnist of the New York Times, author with his wife, Sheryl WuDunn, of Half the Sky, From Oppression to Opportunity for Women Worldwide. You can learn more at Kristof's blog, which is at nytimes.com/ontheground. That's nytimes.com/ontheground. And at halftheskymovement.org. Halftheskymovement, one word, .org. Thank you, Nicholas Kristof. Keep up your excellent work.
Thanks so much.
Okay.